In February 1970, two Birmingham bands released albums that would go on to shape rock history, albeit in different ways. On one hand, Black Sabbath's self-titled debut arrived with dark, sludgy riffs that would invent heavy metal. On the other, The Move, also from Birmingham, issued Shazam, an album that fused loud, heavy riffs with pop melodies and psychedelic weirdness, creating what might just be the first record that could be described as heavy pop. At the time, Shazam didn't receive widespread recognition, but the record has often been credited as the stylistic template for the American hard rock sound of the mid-70s. The fusion of heavy rock with melodic pop sensibilities was a key feature that would influence bands like Kiss and Cheap Trick. And both of these bands have openly cited Roy Wood and Company as a key influence, with Cheap Trick even covering songs by The Move such as California Man and Brontosaurus.
I was this massive Anglophile, and once a week I would take the bus to the subway and the subway down to 8th Street in the Village, Greenwich Village, and go to the International Newsstand and pick up Melody Maker, NME, Sounds, and read about all these great bands. And I was a big fan of The Move. I loved Fire Brigade and all those songs. They had Shazam with stuff like Hello, Suzie, and they were great.
In this video, we're going to explore the history behind Shazam, the record that invented heavy pop. Let's begin. By the time Shazam was released in February 1970, The Move had already scored 5 top 5 singles in the UK, with Blackberry Way even reaching number 1. In addition to that, the group had released their debut album in 1968, which was very well received by the press. But several things happened along the way. Original bassist Ace Kefford left the band shortly after the release of their first LP due to mental health issues which he later attributed to his abuse of substances like LSD. After his departure, guitarist Trevor Burton switched to bass, but he ended up leaving the band in 1969 due to musical differences and was replaced by Rick Price. Oddly enough, The Move spent most of 1969 touring the cabaret circuit in Britain. This was mostly due to the fact that the cabaret circuit in the UK was a very lucrative and steady source of income, and their new manager Peter Walsh was an impresario who specialised in cabaret acts, so he began booking the band into cabaret-style venues. This was almost a dream come true for vocalist Carl Wayne, who had always claimed that his main ambition was to become a cabaret singer. But Roy Wood absolutely loathed the cabaret circuit, and tensions reached a breaking point when Wood threw a glass at a cabaret patron in Sheffield. And to make matters worse, the group embarked on an American tour that turned out to be a financial failure and a logistical disaster. All of this increasingly strained the relationship between Roy Wood and Carl Wayne, who had very different personalities and temperaments. As a result, when The Move entered the studio to record Shazam, tensions between the two had become unbearable, and Wayne left the band shortly before the album was released. By the time The Move started giving interviews about the album to the music press, Carl Wayne had already left the band, and Jeff Lynne had been announced as the group's new member. Unfortunately, despite some press coverage, the record went largely unnoticed, and Roy Wood himself was likely partly to blame for its poor reception. The tensions in the studio had clearly left a bitter taste in his mouth, and Wood surprised the press by telling them that he didn't like the record. Record Mirror reported,
"When a group changes its lineup, and most of all its style, old material tends to be a thing rather best forgotten. But The Move's latest album, Shazam, which features Carl Wayne, has proved to be something of a mixed blessing. The Rolling Stones were so impressed with it that they sent a telegram to The Move telling them it was the best LP they'd heard for 5 years. Praise indeed. But having worked on the material for the album for almost a year, and considering their new fiery approach to their music, The Move find it all a little tiring. Roy Wood said, "I don't really like the album, but perhaps that's because Carl is on it. It's a good album sleeve though. The cover is certainly different. The colors are stark, and The Move are depicted as Superman cartoon-type characters with their faces superimposed. The cover was in fact designed by a friend of the group, Mike Sheridan, who is also involved on a new project with Rick Price."
Mike Sheridan was more than a friend of the group. In fact, both Roy Wood and Jeff Lynne got their start in music playing guitar for Mike Sheridan and the Night Riders. Roy Wood joined the band in 1963 and was replaced by Jeff Lynne later in 1966 when Wood left to form The Move. Shazam was released on February 27, 1970, and the album kicked off with a bang. Roy Wood originally wrote Hello Suzie for Amen Corner, who released their own version of the song as a single in June 1969. Their take on the song showcased an energetic soul-based pop sound, which stood in stark contrast to the Moves version, which blended the song's irresistible pop melody with the sort of heavier sounds that were starting to dominate the music scene in Britain. Hello Suzie is a perfect example of the heavy pop sound that The Move pioneered with this record. The blend of heavy backing with catchy pop hooks and melodies sounded unlike anything else from that era. The heaviness of the opening track gives way to Beautiful Daughter, a fantastic Roy Wood composition featuring a beautiful string arrangement by Tony Visconti, who also played bass on the track. The string arrangement is reminiscent of Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles, which makes sense given Roy Wood's deep admiration for that side of the band. Songs like I Am the Walrus or the already mentioned Eleanor Rigby, which blended pop with intricate string arrangements influenced by classical music. Unlike Hello Suzie, which featured Roy Wood on vocals, the vocals on Beautiful Daughter were handled by Carl Wayne. The song was originally intended to be released as a single, but the release was eventually cancelled following Wayne's departure from the group. As the title indicates, the third track on the album was a revisited version of Cherry Blossom Clinic, a song which had previously appeared on their debut album in 1968. This new version ditched the brass and string arrangements of the original and saw the Move blending pop melodies with a more progressive type of sound, featuring heavier guitars and bombastic drums.
Up above, the sun is high, like a tea tree in the sky. Helicopter lands upon my bed.
This track also features the use of musical quotation, a technique Roy Wood had already explored in Night of Fear, the group's first single. The track includes references to themes by Johann Sebastian Bach, Paul Dukas, and Tchaikovsky. The B-side of the album opens with a cover of Fields of People by American psychedelic group Ars Nova. Due to the Move's hectic touring schedule, by the time they came into the studio to record the album, Roy Wood hadn't written enough new songs to fill it entirely, and that's the main reason why the B-side of the album featured 3 covers. However, this doesn't make the album any less compelling, as the Move infused these covers with their personality and signature sound, making them just as interesting as the original compositions on the record.
Wildflowers grow everywhere, vibrations flow, things will have to change.
The Move's rendition of Fields of People transforms the song into an 11-minute psychedelic journey, with extended instrumental passages, dynamic tempo shifts, and a fantastic raga-style instrumental break. Another highlight from Shazam, and one of its heaviest tracks, is the Move's version of Don't Make My Baby Blue.
I know that I can keep her.
Originally written by Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil, the song was first recorded by Frankie Laine in 1963.
I know that I can keep her.
And later covered by The Shadows in 1965.
I know that I can keep her.
The Move transforms this classic into a hard-hitting heavy track, showcasing Roy Wood's aggressive guitar work and some excellent powerful vocals from Carl Wayne.
I won't be far away, so don't make my baby blue.
This rendition once again exemplifies the band's ability to blend heavy sounds with catchy pop-driven melodies, demonstrating their willingness to redefine genre boundaries.
You better take good care of her.
The Last Thing on My Mind closes Shazam with a daring reinterpretation of this folk classic by Tom Paxton.
Oh, you must know it was the last thing on my mind.
Carl Wayne's powerful vocals are paired with Roy Wood's intricate guitar work and harmonies.
You know that was the last thing on my mind.
And the arrangement includes jangling guitars, subtle harmonies, and a wah-wah-driven solo, which adds a psychedelic touch to the track. It's a beautifully sweet conclusion to this unconventional album. It highlights their adventurous side, showing how they can take a song and make it feel completely their own. Shazam was released in Britain by Regal Zonophone and in the States by A&M Records. As previously stated, despite getting some good reviews, the record went largely unnoticed in the UK, and Roy Wood's less than complimentary comments about the record probably didn't do it any favours in terms of sales. Additionally, the song Brontosaurus, which was the first Move recording to feature Jeff Lynne, was released as a single just a couple of weeks after Shazam hit the stores. The single became a huge hit, reaching number 7 in Britain, and it inevitably stole considerable press and record buyer attention away from Shazam. In the States, the album also got some positive reviews. John Mendelsohn from Rolling Stone magazine wrote,
"If like me you're the sort who collapses to the floor, frothing with delight, palpitating obscenely with excitement and glimpsing nirvana in the presence of rock and roll at its most unremittingly brutal, flashy, and devastatingly vulgar manifestations, then fella, you simply can't live without the Move's Shazam for another instant."
When the album debuted in the US, its heavy feel, catchy pop melodies, and extended solos turned it into a cult favorite, helped in part by some airplay on FM stations. Shazam became the record that introduced many American fans to the Move, and as mentioned earlier, it also served as a stylistic blueprint for the American hard rock sound of the mid-70s, influencing many bands from that period such as Cheap Trick and Kiss. However, by the time these bands started taking the American music scene by storm, Roy Wood had long abandoned the heavy pop sound of Shazam and was now immersed in Wizard, a solo project in which he mixed glam rock with the wall of sound type productions from all those Phil Spector produced records that he so dearly loved. Wizard scored a few huge hits in the UK, but they never gained significant traction in the United States. And despite Roy Wood being championed by groups like Cheap Trick and Kiss, that support didn't translate into record sales in America. In an interview several decades later, Paul Stanley from Kiss recalled,
"Oh, it broke my heart. We were playing Detroit early on, and we used to love to have bands that either influenced us or bands that we liked open for us. In Detroit, we got Roy Wood's Wizard, and I loved See My Baby Jive and all that stuff, that Phil Spector sound. And he went on and just was destroyed. I mean, they just...
The fans hated him.
Hated him. And it broke my heart, It's like, wait a minute, this guy is, this is part of my roots.
I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into Shazam by The Move. See you next time.